Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Bloom Conversations. I'm Claire Dewhirst. I'm the Director of City Nation Place, which is the global forum for place branding and place marketing. I'm honoured that Bloom Consulting has invited me to join these podcast sessions just to introduce the discussions. I see my job as asking the questions on behalf of you to ensure that we learn the most from the Bloom experts and their guest speakers. This podcast series has been launched to celebrate Bloom's 20th anniversary. Happy birthday, Bloom. And throughout the series, we'll be diving into the world of nation branding and place branding. In each episode, we'll be looking at just one thing you could focus on to improve your nation or place brand strategy. In fact, in each episode, we'll be focusing on one of the 14 steps that Bloom have identified as being crucial to building an effective strategy. So just one thing today and 14 things over the series of conversations.
Hello and welcome to this next episode of the Bloom Conversations podcast. And we have reached the final step of Bloom Consulting's 14 steps to nation branding, which also apply to city branding and other place branding. And so on this week's episode, we're going to be talking about reviewing and assessing and even refreshing your brand. I'm delighted to have with us José Torres, Chief Executive of Bloom. Hello again, José.
Hello.
And also we have with us David Gilbert, who is the Chief Executive of Destination Cleveland in the USA. Hi, David. Lovely to see you.
Good to see you too.
I'm looking forward to this chat because we all know each other quite well, so I know that we can really dig into the weeds. I think as well, one of the conversations that might come out of this reviewing and refreshing, perhaps we could also cover the fact that sometimes a change of politicians creates the wrong kind of reviewing and refreshing, but we'll come back to that later. Let me come to you, José. I don't want to steal your thunder. Why is this last step of place branding, A, so important, and B, not at all depressing as it may sound? Because in your notes on the website, it says, your work is never done.
So, Claire, this is really not the last step. It's the last step before we begin, because we've been talking about how to develop a nation, or in this case, also a city brand strategy. And we covered all the steps, but the work begins now. And that's why we always say that is about reflecting. It's also about assessing, repeating, and if you want, refreshing. It's really understanding and going back to the steps to make sure that they're working well, making sure that they're sound and that everything in every single step is working correctly. And question it and see if maybe some are not working so well. I keep on saying that on this 14th step, you have to look into step 7, which is to be on brand and stay on brand, which is another word of saying to make sure if the brand is being correctly implemented. So it's not the end, it's actually the beginning. That's how we see it.
Very good, very good. Now, David, Destination Cleveland, as you know, because we've been talking for a number of years now, and I've very much admired the work you've been doing at Destination Cleveland. It feels like you've shifted very much from a destination tourism brand to a place brand over the last few years. Do you recognize this need when you've got your plan in place that you need to keep going back and assessing it? How does that play out in Destination Cleveland? What works for you at that and what's perhaps a bit more challenging?
You're right that when we went into this, really developing our first place brand, which was now about 11 years ago, we first saw it through a tourism lens. But what we quickly learned is that great brand captures the essence of a place. I've heard José talk about brand equals heart. It's not a slogan. It's not a campaign. And if you get it right, and it still has to evolve, but if you get it right, it should work for attraction of visitors, but also attraction of talent, attraction of capital and other things as well. The evolution has come because we were getting other types of private, public, civic organizations coming to us and asking us to help them with their attraction. Even though initially we were all about visitors, we were getting organizations coming saying, you do a really good job. We love the brand. Can you help us? We had to do a lot of research to understand how someone who may be looking at a city as a place to relocate, their decision criteria is different than someone who may be looking as a visitor. But at the end of the day, the brand is the brand. A great brand should be able to permeate throughout lots of parts of the community and be incredibly cohesive internally for the local population, but also be able to be used externally for many different audiences. We continue to evolve. We've done new research to find how our community has changed. So, how we utilize the brand slightly changes, the brand voice slightly changes, but the essence of it simply does not change. It is who our community is. A long time ago, we had a phenomenal chief marketing officer who came from a consumer products background. And her contention, which I've always believed, is we have to look at our city, our community as a branded product. No different than a toothpaste, no different than a laundry detergent, meaning you have a certain brand promise and you have to deliver on that promise. So you have to look at what your community is and make sure that what that brand, if it's accurate, it promises to somebody. And when they try your community, just like when they try a product, they feel like you are right on target with the brand. You might say you have the best teeth whitening toothpaste, but if someone tries it and it doesn't work, A, not only will that person not utilize your product anymore, they'll make sure they tell their friends and family that what you're saying isn't right. So you have to get the brand right. And your brand promise is not aspirational, it's what you truly are. I've always kept that in mind. And I think too many times people change within a community, leadership and other things change, and they try to change a brand, but I don't think they really understand what a brand is.
Yes, the brand is you. Another way that you may need to evolve the brand is Cleveland itself is evolving because a lot of it down to the great work that you've been doing in Destination Cleveland. But in terms of the pride of the community, I mean, that's a statistic I remember from one of the case studies in the Citizen Engagement Toolkit we published. Before this process began, very few people in Cleveland would recommend Cleveland, and that changed to 70%, I think you've said now, as a recommendation. So that suggests that the mood in Cleveland has changed, the city is evolving. Do you need to evolve the brand to reflect that renewed pride?
I think it's a combination. And you're right, Claire. When we studied first 11 years ago, we realized we had a business problem. Locals were critical to getting others, especially with the advent of social media. Advice from locals, it always ranks now as the top one, two, or three ways in which someone gets information about a community. If locals don't feel good about their community, and we were an older industrial city that had gone through a lot of hard times in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and it created a little bit of a woe is us attitude. We measured locals, only 32% of locals would recommend their city to friends and family as a place to visit. And so we realized that our work needed to start with locals, not just people outside. Now, our peer set was all around the 60s. We are now close to 90%, 11 years later, of locals in the exact same research say they would recommend. But part of what we've had to do is with the brand, get locals to understand what they love best about their community. When you frame it like that, they begin to think about the things that they really like, not about what they don't like, not about something bad that, a river catching on fire in the late 1960s that they've heard about. That was generations ago, but still was in people's minds. And now they think about the things they really love. And look, our community has come a long way. There's so much more now than there was 10, 15, certainly 20, 30 years ago. Wonderful things blossoming in the community. I do think it is really important, and we've done it about every 4 to 5 years to do a lot of research to see how the community has evolved and how people think about the community. And what it allows us to do is make continued evolutions of the brand. We don't change it, we don't scrap it and start over. We feel like we've had it right. But the brand we created 11 years ago was focused on a community that was different 11 years ago than it is today. And so you need to research and understand what locals think of their own community, what outsiders who have experienced the community, what they think, and even what people who've never visited, what they think. And we're actually about to start a lot of great work with Jose around really elevating perception, the quantitative value, and the fact that our organization isn't responsible. We're the ones who work on it the most, but the right brand needs to be accepted and proliferated by many public, private, and civic partners who understand it, get it, utilize it. Our job is ideally to provide toolkits to help them use it in the right way. It is always an evolutionary process.
Jose, do you have any comments or questions for David?
I think you have to look into, when you do this, reflect, this assess, and this repeat, is with the three types of stakeholders, which is brand architects like David and his team. You then have the brand builders, which is really about the stakeholders that contribute. They are not on the core team, but because city branding and nation branding is a systemic approach, it cannot be one entity working on this. It has to be a collaborative effort between different types of stakeholders. And then you have the brand developers. And this is where the community would fall in. They play a fundamental role in delivering this experience and to build this perception, right? So regardless of what's going to happen throughout time, you're always going to have these three types of stakeholders, right? And clearly, the developers normally is where, for instance, politicians would fall, right? So, or government leaders would fall. This is the tricky part because you depend a lot on them, and they are the ones that also make you change and think a lot about your brand. When we say change or think, we don't necessarily say, oh, I have to change entirely the brand strategy, but at least I have to find a way to bring them to see if they understand, as David said, because the architects have this challenge and this objective to keep them always on board. For that, you always need to assess, because you always reflect and see what's working, what's not working, to really bring them on board and explain to them why this is important for them and why it is important for the city or for the nation. In the end, this is not about creating a very nice image alone. This is not about creating just a good position on the ranking. This has economic and tangible value for the country or for the city, right? And most of the times, regardless if it's public capital invested in the city brand or on the nation brand, you need to justify how is that bringing that back to the community. This is also a very important component, which is, we're doing this because we want to bring a better lifestyle for everyone, better job opportunities, a more fair and balanced society, and so on and so forth. So this is very important. You need to double check all the steps to make sure everything is resonating. And if there's any specific stakeholder that is not engaging or understanding, it's either because the step is not working perfectly well, or it's because the stakeholder is new and is not familiar with the nation or with the city brand.
When we look at what we actually mean by assess and reflect, it seems to me that you're both talking about some key areas. One is the stakeholder engagement, which has to be an ongoing process. Two is understanding perceptions of the place internally and externally. I always get worried when people say we're launching our brand. It sounds too much like a consumer brand at that point. We've done our research, we've identified a gap in the market, we've come up with the product, we've given it a brand, and now we're going to launch it. And with places, it does feel different because the brand is how you're already perceived. You've always been there, but the way that the narrative that you want people to start using it, for me, it feels more like an evolution process, even from the start. So stakeholders and that perception and how those perceptions are changing. And I think what you're also hinting at there, Jose, is the KPIs, the evaluation of what the brand is achieving. Would you say that's an important part of this last step too? You've set your KPIs at the beginning, but it's a continuous measurement against what you were trying to achieve in the first place.
Absolutely. And one of the things you mentioned there was, I feel iffy, like when you talk about launching a brand. And if you remember, steps 11 says, don't launch the
Oh,
brand.
Lord. Yes.
But at the same time, you also have to understand that if you initiate the Nation Brand Project, this is a way to materialize and to raise the profile of the initiative. This is more from a domestic perspective, from a local perspective, even from a community perspective. This is very, very important for them to understand. You're more subject to criticism, and sometimes this creates a little bit of a backlash or strong criticism, but at the same time, you're opening the discussion. I was very interested to know, when we look into the journey of Destination Cleveland and the time you've worked on building such an ambitious strategy. The organization is very fresh thinking when we talk about places. And I was just wondering, throughout that journey, when we talk about these stakeholders, what was the biggest challenge you faced throughout this journey? And what were the things that you had to reassess, aside from the community that you mentioned was a reassessment? Any other specific area that you believe was particularly challenging? And what would you recommend our listeners to actually recommend them to how to tackle them?
Well, it's a great question, Jose, and it fits so well into what the two of you were just talking about in terms of launch and KPIs. I think the biggest challenge is focused on, everyone considers themselves a marketer. People who don't understand brand, they look at they think of slogan, they think of campaign, they think of tagline, however you put it. And because it can be subjective, you have to be incredibly strategic in how you roll it out. Our community had gone through lots of different civic campaigns, and people made fun of some of the old ones from well before our time, 25, 30, 40 years ago. And what I feel like there are two important things when you're going to roll it out. This is important before you make some grand announcement. One, if you have the ability, and this gets back to our challenge, is how can you already have some proven results? People know and see results, and it's hard to argue with results. The other is you have to be really careful in who are the key stakeholders that you need to get behind what you're doing. Get them in early, get them in quietly, get them in a way that when you do a launch, you already have an important group of people standing behind you that all say, we are part of this. What we did was two things. And this was back when we created our first true community brand. We had a lot of research done ahead of time, including focus groups, which was fascinating to show what other people thought of Cleveland. One of the things we were looking at, our customer was not locals. Our customers were people from the outside. We wanted to make sure they thought differently of Cleveland. And so we actually hosted a series. We had a significant CEO in our town that was on our board, really liked what we did. We hosted over the course of a few weeks, 6 or 7 different sessions, each one inviting about 12 or 15 CEO level public, private, and civic leaders. We had the person who developed our brand from the agency. So one, it was a third party. It was not us, a third party expert. Gave a whole presentation. It was an amazing presentation on how we got where we are, showing a lot of amazing things from not only research, but also focus groups where locals would say, oh, everyone must know we have a great orchestra. We have traditionally it's the most endowed orchestra in the United States, and oftentimes considered one of the top 5 orchestras in the world. Most people are very surprised. Locals know that. People outside don't know it. So when we showed focus groups in a big city, Pittsburgh, 2 hours away, and asked a group of 20 people, does Cleveland have an orchestra? And not one person knew. It sort of was a light bulb with the other people in the room that, they got it. They got the fact that we were creating something for people who did not know Cleveland. And by the time we did a big public launch at an annual meeting about 6 or 8 months later, we already had 50, 75 people, important leaders in our town who were all bought in, who we had done small groups with. A lot of them said after, I don't know if it resonates with me. And what we would say is 2 things. A, you're not our demographic. You may be a 65-year-old white male. The people we are most looking at, people that are most open to visiting are people in their 20s and 30s. You are not our audience. You are here. You have a particular point of view about Cleveland. And even a great brand doesn't resonate with everybody because you have infinite points of view. But in the end, with our brand essence video and how we did it, people loved it. I mean, this is no joke. People tears in their eyes seeing this video. This is no joke. Said, I have never seen something that captures Cleveland so well. Even if it didn't resonate, they understood it intellectually because the research showed how much it resonated. I think that I don't know if I'd say maybe we got lucky in our strategy because it worked. But in hindsight, I think it would have been a big problem if we would have just done some launch and because brand, it's part art and part science. And the art part is that a place means different things to different people. And you're never going to make everybody happy. You're never going to satisfy everybody. You want to be careful. And the people who have the loudest voices, at a minimum, they can understand and appreciate it and won't sort of poo-poo it from the beginning. And it really helped us. Then what happened is over the course of several years, we were able to show results related to our KPIs of how dramatically the perception of Cleveland changed by the use of the brand, how dramatically the number of people visiting outpaced our country, our state for many, many years, every year by the use of brand. Then it made it harder to argue from a business standpoint that it shouldn't be utilized. And it took a lot of time. But I think how we did the launch in hindsight ended up being, it could have killed it at the very beginning. And thankfully, it allowed us time to show that it worked.
I think you're right. We have our accelerated training course, and one of the things we talk about is mapping your stakeholders and identifying whether because of that individual character of that person or because of their role, they might be a breaker or they might be a maker. And you and I have talked before about government engagement, and I know that you have a really strong focus on making sure that you've met all of the key members, both of the ruling party and of the other. This is a fantastic conversation. You've done such great work. We are nearly at the end of our time, so I'm going to come back to José. If you have one piece of advice to give somebody out there who is surprised that they've got to the last step and it still just says do it all over again, what would that one piece of advice be?
Well, I would say read the 14 steps, and I'm going to read very fast what are the 14 steps to you. So, which is lay the foundations and create the preliminary structure. This is for the architects. The second step is understand current perceptions, and this relates a lot to the KPIs. The third one is understand your markets. The fourth one is be realistic and set realistic objectives. And again, I'm repeating the ones that you have to reassess and refresh. The fifth one is mitigate any risk and prepare for potential crisis. This one is ongoing. Define your central idea. Be on brand, stay on brand. Step 8 is about audit and activate the touch points which deliver the experience and the promise, and the idea is built thanks to these touch points. The 9th step is about the governance and management model. The 10th is engage with stakeholders. The 11th, don't launch the brand and don't create the logo. As we say, there's a don't in the sense of a heads up. Of course, you also have to do it. The 12th step is about monitor and measure your brand. Again, KPIs. The 13th is think about nation and city branding 2.0. And the 4th one, which is the one we're doing now, is reflect, assess, and repeat.
Thank you. I can see David nodding a lot to those, and to everyone who's new to place branding, it sounds really easy, doesn't it? So that's why we're trying to build up this library of best practice and ideas and thoughts to help people. Thank you very much, David, for joining us today and sharing so openly all the work that you're doing in Cleveland. If anybody wants to read any more, we have some of your case studies on the Place Brand portfolio. I'm sure José will soon have something to say about the work that they're doing with you on the Bloom Consulting website. Thank you, José. It's the last of the steps, but it's not the last podcast. There'll be 2 more. I've talked about KPIs, and I think in the next episode, we're going to be looking at the research work that Bloom has done with support from City Nation Place, working out the economic impact of place brands. And in our last episode, José and Heath Dinney, who is the president of Bloom Consulting, are going to answer some questions that will have come through to us on LinkedIn about some of the perennial challenges of place branding. So thank you very much, José. Thank you, David. Thanks everyone for listening.
For having me.
Thank you very much.